welcome to Daily Debrief from People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya and today we talk about the conclusion of the WTO Ministerial Conference. India's new policy for temporary recruits in the military draws widespread protests. And in our third story, Omnibus law protests continue in Indonesia. The 12th WTO Ministerial Conference ended on the morning of 17 June, almost 2 days after it was expected. It began on 12 June to review the functioning of its top decision-making body. While countries negotiated, there were widespread demands for the WTO to withdraw from certain economic sectors, those related to food security, agriculture and fisheries in particular. However, all eyes were on the question of the TRIPS waiver on COVID-19 related products. The original proposal would have led to better access to vaccines, tests and medicines. However, rich countries have been a stumbling block for 2 years. What happened at the WTO Ministerial? Anna from the People's Health Movement joins us. Hi Anna, welcome again to the show. Anna, the Ministerial concluded, what was the conclusion on the COVID-19 response? Can you just walk us through it?
Yeah, sure. So as was expected, just briefly before the ministerial conference, the actual decisions taken by the ministers and the delegates there was quite meaningless when it comes to actually the measures which can be implemented on based on that. So the first thing that we have to point out is that there was no TRIPS waiver. So the document that was adopted at the ministerial is no waiver. It is a decision which was drafted by the WTO Secretariat. It was backed by the rich countries. It was pushed on the table for the Global South to discuss. And then because there was a lot of pressure on the ministerial to actually come up with some kind of practical outcome, they finally negotiated the decision that was published this morning. So right. Yeah, maybe we can just walk through the main points from the decision. So as I said, it's no waiver. So it's the main thing that it does. It lifts, or maybe maybe it relaxes a bit some of the limitations for export that exist under the TRIPS agreement. But on the other hand, it makes very complicated for countries to use the flexibilities that were already there, like compulsory licenses, for example. And then there is also there's also an issue with eligibility criteria for the countries which will be able to use the decision. So not WTO members will be able to use the decision, but it's limited to developing countries, as they say. But then again, it's not it's not all developing countries, but it's not China. So the US was very eager throughout the process to make sure that China cannot use this decision, and that was mirrored in a previous formulation which stated that any member state who was responsible for 10% or more of production of vaccines in 2021 would not be able to use the decision. And so China, of course, came back quite hard at that, and they didn't want to agree. They made a very strong point that they would not be using the decision. They would not be using so everything that it offered, but they did not want that statement to be included in the final text. And so what we ended up with is a text which actually has no, it doesn't say that the countries which are responsible for the 10% should not use the decision. But on the other hand, it has a very funny footnote, which is quite, it's quite openly about statements that China made before, and they say the footnote states that such statements which were made on WTO fora before would be used as binding. And so, the statements that China made before will be used as binding, as a promise by China that they will not use the decision. There are still some pending questions which will be cleared throughout the day, I hope. because the ministerial was prolonged for quite a bit of time. It was a bit chaotic at the end. So, we'll learn more about how the decision actually was adopted, whether it was published on time, whether all the delegates had actually read through the statement, the decision before it was announced by the Secretariat. So there's a lot more to learn, but for now, this is what we know.
Okay. Anna, there were other discussions on fisheries, on agriculture, on food security. Can you tell us what are the conclusions over there?
So, the agenda actually included quite a bit of things. As you said, it included fisheries, agriculture, food security, e-commerce. And so on some of these things, the delegates managed to get a consensus, like for the fishing subsidies, what the WTO sees as a framework for preventing overfishing. But on the other hand, we do know that there's often or always more than meets the eye when WTO policies are concerned. So we know that in the past, when something was presented as a protection of this sort, could lead and did lead actually to undermining the livelihoods of small-scale producers, of small fishermen and fisherfolk. So it's not. It shouldn't be interpreted as a clear-out victory like many rich countries are presenting it in the mainstream media today. And then, of course, there were a couple of discussions on agriculture and on food security. And of course, we have seen throughout the mobilization of civil society during the ministerial, and particularly by the global peasant movement, La Via Campesina, and also other trade justice activists, that the effects of the WTO policies on agriculture have had dire effects on how the sector is looking today. So we know that if the WTO had managed to reach a consensus on this on the agriculture agenda, which luckily it did not, it would probably mean more exploitation for small-scale farmers, more power for the big producers. So it's actually a good thing that the WTO was not able to deliver all the consensus that it was hoping for. And this is actually the last point, I think, that it's quite worth stressing at this point, is that there was a very, very strong sense of urgency, or actually what we could call also, yes, well, eagerness is maybe also not strong enough. But basically, the WTO Secretariat really wanted this ministerial to lead to a number of decisions. And that's because the last ministerial ended with no particular conclusion at all. The Secretariat was worried, the rich countries were worried that this would make it even more clear that the WTO is actually not fit to take any of these decisions, that it's not the place where we should be discussing food security or, agriculture, health. So the WTO is really should play no role in this. And although the last statement that came out of the Secretariat this morning was very triumphant, and they were saying like this is unprecedented, and it's I think the European Commission called it like a list of key decisions made by the WTO. It actually should not be seen like that. So they were. The whole process was very exclusive towards global South countries. There were different attempts to limit their participation in the negotiation. There were, global South countries were called out in the media for allegedly obstructing negotiations, when we know that for almost 2 years, rich countries had put in enormous effort to stop the discussion on a true TRIPS waiver. So the meeting was not a success, whatever the rich countries and the Secretariat would like to present it as. It was actually another proof that the WTO should just quit.
Thanks a lot for your time, Anna. The Indian government announced a new policy to temporarily recruit soldiers for its armed forces, which has led to violent protests across the country. Soldiers will be recruited for 4 years instead of the usual 15 years or longer. and retire without pension or health benefits. The armed forces are one of the primary long-term government employment sectors in India. Abdul will tell us more about it. Abdul, could you give us details of this policy, why the government is so keen on it as well?
Well, there are economic reasons behind it. As per the government's logic, India has a military of 1.4 million people, and out of the $70 billion it spends on the defense, half of it goes on salaries and pensions. So it is hardly left with any money for modernization. That is what they're thinking. The Indian government, when it introduces this scheme. So as per the scheme, the proposed scheme, there will be recruitment of youth between 17 years and half to 21 years, and for 4 years they will serve in the army. They will be called Agniveer, and after 4 years they will 75% of them will retire, forcefully retired. 25% of them will be observed in the army to serve the regular long-term service, which is 15 years plus.
Right.
So those who will retire will get some money out of what they have saved from their salaries, from the corpus fund which government is creating, and so on and so forth. And as per the government's announcement, they will be, some of the state governments have announced in India that they will be preferred when the recruitment of police and other things are happening. Okay. So given this is the basic detail which has come out, there are other finer details which are still to be sorted out. It was a scheme announced in a hurry, and as one of the parts of what this government is claiming to be its employment generation schemes.
Right.
So because there is a huge unemployment in India, and they think that this may cater to some of those issues apart from dealing with the economic side in the armed forces.
Okay, Abdul, how is this form of recruitment different from what we had so far in India? And also, if it's an employment generation scheme, then why are the youth protesting?
That is a good question. We'll come to that later. To answer your first question, see, as we discussed, in the army, which is one of the largest recruiters in India, the usual recruitment is after 18 years, the youth is selected through physical examination and so on and so forth, and they are allowed to serve in the army until they reach the age of 40 and so. So it's a long-term job, and after they get retired, they are also eligible for pension and other benefits. Then there are other facilities which are available. For example, if they are injured while during their service, they are given certain allowances and so on and so forth. In this scheme, which has been introduced, it is only for 4 years, and those who will be recruited will not be eligible for any pension. It means after 21 years, when they are at the prime of their youth, they will be in no position to do anything else. Given the larger scenario of unemployment in the country, it will be difficult for them to compete for any other jobs, because most of the other employment opportunities are based on competitive exams.
Right.
Since they will be serving in the army, they will not be able to get the time at that age at that particular crucial phase of their life, when they had time to prepare for other competitive exams to get jobs. So that is the reason, one of the reasons, apart from other reasons, that they are not eligible for pension. This is a short-term recruitment, and at recruitment at a time when they are at the prime of their studies and everything, where they can prepare for other long-term jobs. These particular schemes will be implemented. Hence, a large number of youth in India, which is already facing unemployment. As per the records, among the youth, India is a demographically a country which is considered to be advantageous for its larger economic setup. the youth population is huge and millions of youth are unemployed. And at that time, when this kind of scheme is introduced by the government which promised when it came to power that they will generate 20 million employment each year,
Right.
they are not able to recruit that much. Of course, in this announcement, along with this announcement for this short-term scheme, Prime Minister Modi also talked about creating 1 million jobs. See, the promise was 20 millions. He is now saying that 1 million job, that too in 18 months, 1.5 years. As per the different surveys published by different agencies, the need is more than 90 million jobs each year. If you want to kind of balance the demographic, if you want to use that demographic advantage you have, you need to create 90 million jobs every year, but you are only able to offer 1 million job, and that too of this nature. So of course, a large number of young people are angry. They are disillusioned. So that's why they are expressing their anger wherever they can in different forms.
All right, Abdul, thanks very much for that update. There were widespread protests in Indonesia on 15 June as the Labour Party called to renew pressure against a so-called Omnibus law. Unions and environmentalists want the government to withdraw the law passed in Parliament in 2020 amid protests. The law combines over 70 regulations into one that cuts worker and environment protections. It was done in the name of simplifying procedures, attracting foreign investment, and job creation. We'll talk to Anish from People's Dispatch about this. Hi Anish, welcome. Anish, just curious, this law had been struck down by a court. So why is the government of Indonesia so keen to reintroduce it? And why are there protests against it?
So yeah, it's a very good question because in November last year, the Constitutional Court, which is like the Supreme Court over there, the apex court of Indonesia, had deemed it as conditionally unconstitutional. So what happened is that the bill's passage has been deemed to be illegal or like with serious lapses in procedure. Because it did not go for public consultation as bills like these, which is why it's called an omnibus bill. It's going to change more than 70 existing labor codes, regulations, environmental rules, and everything. So a bill like this requires extensive public consultation as per the Indonesian constitution and its legislative process, and also extensive deliberation on point-by-point basis in the parliament. So this was not something that the government did. It pushed through the bill during the pandemic, during the cover of the pandemic, arguing that they just didn't have the logistics to conduct enough public consultation or deliberations or whatever. Pretty much in a matter of days, they just passed through this humongous bill that is about more than 1,000 pages long. And so this is something that the court found to be a serious lapse in its passage, and so it was set as conditionally unconstitutional, which means that it cannot be enacted and neither can it be amended or changed or whatever. So it was basically put in a back burner, and it could not be used or enacted or enforced. On the other hand, the bill was given like a 2-year time before which these procedural problems had to be fixed by the parliament. And if they fail to do that, they would be going for the whole thing. What happened is, this is something that I need to add, last month, the parliament passed a set of amendments to its legislative process. So the definition of public consultation was changed, and also the definition of and also the procedure of passing such massive laws, such omnibus-style laws, was also changed. And even the deliberation in the parliament and its procedures were changed. So the set of amendments of the entire legislative process was done just so that they could, and which many have seen it as, a hint of them trying to pass this law by July next month.
Can you also talk about the protests? How have those shaped up?
Exactly. So obviously, we have seen massive protests happening in 2020, 21. This time, the protest movement, the organizers of the protest at the time have combined together as a political party. It's just called the Labour Party right now, sort of trying to give us more labor-oriented, progressive alternative in the political mainstream. But at the same time, there is a more concerted effort to organize workers and environmentalists and other groups that will be affected by this this omnibus law, the Job Creation Act. On 15th, we saw a massive protest in like thousands congregated outside the Parliament building, and many thousands even protested in major industrial hubs across the country. So, and they are not going to give up so easily with just one-day protest. There will be more mobilization expected. And a part of the reason is because of the manner in which it is going to change the entire structure that protects labor rights. Not only that, but also environmental regulations and forest and mining industry. All of that is going to be changed by this law. It is a massive neoliberalization program that is being pushed as a quote unquote job creation panacea by the government. So this is how we are going to see massive mobilization in the coming weeks. And we can definitely see that the resistance is not going to die down, because they're obviously calling out the more obvious parts of how the government is trying to undermine even legislative procedure to pass this bill.
All right, Anish, thanks very much for that update. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. We look forward to see you again tomorrow. Do keep watching us for more news and analysis, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter for updates from around the world.
For more videos on people's struggles, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.